Hello and welcome to the Georgian Book Club. So I did do it. I got it done. It took some time, but I got it done. I finished Tristram Shandy for the second time. Did tell you I was going to do this at some point, and I have. So there we go. So before we get to Tristram Shandy, remember, if you would like to support us, there is our shop where we have books and writing services. There is also our Redbubble shop where we have over 100 designs. You can support us by going to either of those. If you want to support us but you don't want to spend any money, that is absolutely fine. Like, subscribe, comment and share. They all help us. So we did it. We finished it. We finished Tristram Shandy. It was nowhere near as difficult to read the second time as it was the first time. So here it is. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy by Laurence Sterne. So I'm not going to give you the introduction and all the ways that this book is quite unique, because I did that in the first one. I did what everyone else says in the first video, that it's a very interestingly structured book. It is one of a kind. It is quite an oddity to read because you have so many digressions. But I wasn't reading it for the first time. I was rereading it. And the beauty of rereading something like Tristram Shandy is it's a very different experience the second time round. Absolutely a different experience the second time round. For one thing, you know which bits you can skip, because you read it the first time and you diligently read every single word of it. You read all the notes and you try to make head nor tail of everything. And then you read it a second time and you're like, you know what? I can skip the sermon and just read the little little interruptions of Dr. Slop and Toby and Sir Walter. I can, so you do quickly realize, this doesn't have to be quite as bogged down an experience as it was the first time, because there is a lot of nonsense in it. It's deliberately nonsensical. It's deliberately in there. And now, the way this was originally published is each of these volumes was put out one at a time. So there are 9 volumes in this. And they were all released individually. So if you're reading this one at a time every year, 6 months to a year, these digressions are not going to be a problem. If you're reading this as one big solid novel, yeah, they sort of become a bit, I think we can skip that. Do I want to? Can I come back to it? Because you can always come back to it. That is the other thing with a book like this. Because of its narrative incoherence, you can actually go, okay, I'll come back to that and read that later. I may not read that right now. I'll just skim it. So you do discover that on your second reading, which is really useful. The other thing I discovered on the second reading is that this novel has 2 different modes. The first 5 volumes are very satirical, and they're actually the first, reading it this time, I felt like, yes, the first 5 volumes, that I really, really like. Up until volume 5, which deals with Tristram's circumcision via window sash. But after that, 6, 7, 8 and 9, and this is interesting because they have a bigger gap between them in terms of the writing, especially 7, 8 and 9. Between 6 and 7, Sterne was very ill and went to Europe for the better climate because he had TB, like Keats. And so there is actually several years gap between volume 6 and volume 7. And what happened in English literature between volume 6 and volume 7? Sentiment. The sentimental comes in. So you go from the more highly satirical, sharp, Augustan writing, and you move into a sentimental mode. And you do see this happening in volume 6 to a lesser extent, but you really see this sentimental mode pick up in 7, 8 and 9. 8 and 9 especially with the wooing of the widow Wadman, and the difficulty about the very exact nature of Captain Toby's groin injury. The sentiment, so you do actually notice that it has picked up that sentimental. And in picking up the sentimental, although these characters are the same, the emphasis changes ever so slightly. And although they're the same silly, ridiculous characters, the addition of sentiment kind of curdles the comedy a little bit. Exactly how much are you meant to care is a really important question, because at the beginning, not that much. By the end, you really should feel a bit sorry for Captain Toby Shandy, and his difficulty in communicating exactly what the widow Wadman needs to hear, because she's not going to engage in a second marriage with a husband who can't quite perform. So you do feel sympathy for her, that she has a very good reason for not wanting yet another marriage where he's just not quite up to it. So I did notice that the second time that I read this. It was not something that I noticed the first time. I didn't notice the first time partly because I was just overwhelmed by the book itself and sort of surprised that you can do that in a book. You can make all these digressions, or you can just play with the form so much. And really I struggled with the language when I first read it, and was not terribly familiar with 18th century modes across the entirety of the 18th century, having really only looked at Fielding, who is in the Augustan end of things, and having not really encountered sentimental literature yet. I wasn't able at that point to see that switch. So I would definitely say that the first 5 books of Tristram Shandy are definitely my favourite. They're certainly the ones with the most bawdy humour, because although there is bawdy humour in the widow Wadman's inquiries, the way that it's written, having added the sentimental in, takes some of the barb out of that humour, and you do feel sorry for those people. I don't think you're really meant to feel sorry for them. Like they are a little bit supposed to be a bit like a Hogarth print or a caricature. So that the sentimental, although you can understand why Sterne is moving in that direction, because that is where taste is going, and he's very popular. It is something that is not, it is a very marked shift from what was happening at the beginning of the novel that he was writing. So that was something that I noticed just stylistically about the book, that there was no way I could have noticed that the first time I read it. And it's something that I've noticed nobody else brings up, because everyone talks about all the really obvious stuff. So I think it's something that you only notice when you've read it a second time. The other thing I did notice a lot more about the book itself, and the characters themselves, and Tristram as a narrator, rather than, and therefore what Sterne is doing, that I didn't notice the first time. As I said, most of the big heavy books, when you read them for the first time, you are just slogging your way through. You're not picking up nuance. You're not picking up a lot of things, because they're often so unfamiliar to you that it's very difficult to work out, oh gosh, what is there? What is going on? Let alone, what are all the tricks happening? So this time reading, because I am writing at the same time, that was an interesting situation to be in, because I started to look at Tristram as a writer, not Sterne, but Tristram, because Tristram is that first person narrator. And while looking at it, I realized, now this is not Sterne. I am very clear about this. This is not Laurence Sterne. This is Tristram. Because Tristram, as a writer, is a very inexperienced writer. And what he is doing as an inexperienced writer is writing everything down as it presents itself. So in order to tell this story, I have to tell you this story, and I go off on this digression and this digression and this digression. He is inexperienced and unable, therefore, to mold and shape his material. Now, that is Tristram, not Sterne. Not Sterne. Sterne knows exactly what he is doing. But Tristram doesn't, because all the Shandian men have hobby horses. Captain Toby's hobby horse is military things, and his bowling green. Walter's hobby horse is his philosophy and his ability to take an idea, no matter how obscure, and build a whole world view around it. And Tristram's hobby horse is writing his life. And because it's a hobby horse, he's enthusiastic about it, but he's not the same as somebody who is professional, just as his father is not a good philosopher, just as his uncle is, a little bit too obsessive about the military. Tristram is not a good writer. He is unable to do all the rearranging, the mental rearranging that a writer does. And I realized this as I was reading, because I'm writing at the moment, and one of the things that happens when you're writing is books don't turn up in chronological order, which is why writers have generally a writing diary, a writing journal, some way to keep a hold of it. Some writers solve this by going into absurd amounts of plotting, but I don't necessarily advise that as a good idea. That seems a recipe for an absurd amount of redrafting, simply because books don't turn up in chronological order, and you get information that, oh, hang on, that changes this. And you have to get very good at ordering it and working out which bits do I keep, which bits do I reveal now, especially if you are telling something that isn't exactly a straight through line narrative, a chronological narrative where you are moving about more thematically, which I currently am doing. You have to really think about, well, how do I tell this? And how do I maintain narrative tension? And how do I shape it so that I'm not just telling bit here, bit there, bit here, bit there, and relying on the reader to pick that up and pick that together? That is what Tristram is not doing, because he is a hobby horse rider. He is not shaping his narrative. He is riding his hobby horse and holding on for as tightly as he can in order to get the story out. That's how we know it's a hobby horse. Now, on the subject of hobby horses, and you see a lot more about hobby horses in the first 5 volumes. The first 5 volumes talk about hobby horses a great deal. The last 4, less so. As I said, the last 4 are getting more into the sentimental mode. And the sentimental mode does not really allow for the hard riding of hobby horses. Sterne is satirizing a particular group of people. Walter Shandy, Toby, Tristram himself. These are wealthy, idle men. These are wealthy, idle men who have nothing at all to fill their time with, and therefore they fill them with hobby horses. Now, Captain Toby, and I have to call him Captain Toby because otherwise I think of porridge. That may have been deliberate on the porridge company's part, but Captain Toby Shandy, he didn't start riding a hobby horse until he was injured. He was a man who had an active role in the world. He was a soldier, he was an officer, and he liked doing that. He was good at that. And then a large piece of masonry or stone fell on him, and given that, which you realise reading it the second time, because again, it's a little overwhelming as a book the first time that you read it, given that he spent 3 years recuperating from that injury that may or may not have castrated him, we don't exactly know. It's never confirmed one way or the other. He had a large piece of masonry fall on him in his groin injury area. He took 3 years to recover from that, which rather suggests he broke something in his pelvis, like bone, like bad, like this sort of thing usually kills someone. So, you know, this is not just it doesn't take 3 years to recover from a soft tissue injury. But it is entirely possible that it takes 3 years with the kind of medicine that they have and no cast to recover from an osteo injury, which is implied. We never get a full account of his injury, but we know it's severe. And Toby discovers his hobby horse as he is recuperating, as he is recovering in his brother's house. So Toby's hobby horse is enforced by injury. Both he and Trim are injured, retired soldiers. They were active men in the world, and so I don't think anyone begrudges Toby his hobby horse. It is the occupation of a man who really does not have another occupation, because it was he lost it due to an injury. He is the most sympathetic character in the book. You can't not love Toby. Tristram loves his uncle, but the reader also really loves Toby. He is frequently described as the mildest, gentlest, kindest of men. But everything about him endears you to him, whether it is in the satirical mode or the sentimental. That is the power of that character, is he is very sympathetic, even when he's ridiculous, even when we are speculating on the state of his manhood. Walter has his hobby horse. Walter's hobby horse is seen as more ridiculous. If Toby's is the result of enforced idleness, Walter's is something more criticized. It is his... Let's just say, if Walter Shandy were alive today, he'd be somebody who tells you to do your own research, and who can dredge things up from goodness knows where. Thus, Walter Shandy has his notions of conception, his notions of birth, his notions of noses, his notions of naming, all of which go hideously wrong for Tristram. Conceived as part of a union where his father failed to wind the clock, and thus failed to wind up his wife due to Locke's association of ideas, or as we would say, Pavlovian association of ideas. His notion of heads and the soul and intellect has been formed after the birth of his first son, who he regards as a fool, Bobby. Bobby dies at a point in the novel, leaving Tristram the only heir to the Shandy family. And as a result, there is a contention between him and his wife wishing to have the midwife deliver her child, and Walter wanting Dr. Slop to with his forceps, because he would like... He believes that a breech birth would be better, even though anyone with any sense would tell you a breech birth is far more dangerous, is a serious and dangerous thing. He then also, after Dr. Slop is forced to attend the birth and delivers the baby head first, Dr. Slop breaks his nose with the forceps, which, again, flattens entirely one of Walter's theories about long noses, which I think means high-bridged noses rather than broken-bridged noses, but like a Roman nose. So he has an issue with that. And then finally, the naming of a child and the importance of naming. And of course, that goes awry too. And so everything Walter tries sort of comes apart, because he's riding a hobby horse. He's focusing all his attention in the wrong places. Even the Tristampedia, he encounters exactly the same problem that his son is encountering in writing his life, is that children grow faster and life gallops on faster than one can write, and therefore large sections of the Tristopedia are obsolete before he's even finished. Meantime, his wife has been in total charge of the care of the child, which he's a little concerned about. But he really and honestly could have focused on that if it was a genuine concern. But no, the hobby horse is more important. Tristram also has his hobby horse. He's writing this story, this novel, this history. And Sterne, who is a man who had to work his way through life, who was not handed something on a plate, is satirizing these people whose lives are so easy. Whose lives are so easy that they have to invent things to cause conflict, invent things to interest them, invent things to occupy their time. So, and I do think it's interesting. I keep getting into arguments with Jane Austen people, which is why we're not doing any Jane Austen, because they will kill me. They will kill me. But it is interesting when you look at those stories, that they are the stories of the idle rich. Those stories are about the idle rich. Those people don't have to do a darn thing. And that is never ever criticized. Sterne is saying, if you are wasting your time with hobby horses, which you could spend out in the world doing something, it is a waste of a life. As I said, Toby's is the only innocent hobby horse, because Toby's is an enforced hobby horse. He has no other choice. He has been very badly injured. His hobby horse is his coping mechanism. But what is Tristram's excuse for a hobby horse? What is Walter's? Why are they hobby horsing instead of doing the things that they probably should? Why are there so many pulls upon the £1,000 that Walter inherits, that he then cannot work out what to spend it on? Why is his estate in such a poor state? Why? Because he spends his time on a hobby horse rather than administering his estate properly. The hobby horses are not an innocent diversion. They're a symptom of things being not attended to, which is an interesting thing to think about. Now, Tristram Shandy is most probably a completed work. We don't know exactly how many books Sterne intended to write. Tristram implies that he was going to keep writing. I think Sterne, who had got enormous success with this, was also planning to keep going with it, but that it does get to a natural stopping point with it's a cock and bull story. And then he did move on. He was also writing at the same time The Sentimental Journey, which is Parson Yorick's tour of France and Italy. Now, he was writing these concurrently. So, did he intend for Tristram to end and then pick it up with Yorick so that the popularity of Tristram fed into The Sentimental Journey and allowed that to keep going? Because Yorick becomes a much more convenient receptacle for the sentimental. These characters, although it does shift to the sentimental, it does feel a little bit awkward. So it is possible that he got to 9 volumes of Tristram Shandy and decided, okay, I'm going to shift this to the sentimental journey, because that is now the taste, and this isn't as easy to write anymore. Like it is not it's not without worth that the Widow Wadman, the wooing of the Widow Wadman, is left to the end, is written in this, at this point in the book. It suits that this ill-fated romance suits the sentimental. Had it been written in earlier mode, it would probably be a lot more. There would be a certain level of cruelty to it that isn't in it. The wooing of the Widow Wadman is much sweeter than you would probably expect from the earlier part of the book. So you can certainly see that that to continue on in the mode that he had been, these characters are just not going to suit that very well. So it probably hit a good natural stopping point. However, reading it a second time, not that it marred the book for me, but it was something that I did notice, that I definitely preferred the first 5 to the last 4 books. But that's a me thing. I'm not a particularly sentimental reader. I'm not a particular reader of the sentimental. And if I am going to do that sort of thing, and it's not Keats, I generally go, okay, if we're going to do romantic and we're going to do sentimental and we're going to do all of that sort of thing, I'll do it in German, because you may as well go all in as not. But yeah, that is Tristram Shandy for the second time. Absolutely read it a second time. Read it a second time. Read it once, leave it a little while, read it a second time. It will read differently. I certainly found it read differently. It'll probably read differently if I read it a third time. I think most of these big books that you can end up reading, I know Tom Jones read differently the second time. I'm pretty sure if I reread Ulysses, that will read differently the second time. Or if Otterline rereads Ulysses, I don't think she's going to. That would read differently a second time. War and Peace would read differently a second time, but it took 3 runs to get War and Peace, so no way. Didn't like any of the characters. No, I liked one character and they killed him, so that was it. No. Do not like you, sir. But I don't think we're going back to the Russians at all anyway. They're too depressing. But Tristram Shandy is definitely worth a second read. Definitely worth a read after you have perhaps engaged with more 18th century novels, especially when you understand that shift that's happening in the middle of the century between the Augustan writers and the more sentimental writers, who are the precursors to the Romantics, as we talked about. We did 3 whole videos on the heralding Romantics. And this book happens to sit astride that shift, which does make it a really interesting one, because I don't think there are any other books that sit astride that quite so dramatically. Part of the reason is his health took a turn for the worse, and he wasn't writing for several years, and then had to, keep in with the taste, because, books are something you've got to be able to sell them. And he did sell them. They were enormously popular. But I can see how these would be much more readable in small doses rather than reading it as one large compendium. Because really that's what it is. The whole novel, like this, is sort of a compendium. You could read it in small bite-sized chunks. Each of the volumes is about 50 pages in this. So you can read it and pick it up, put it down and read it like it's 9 smaller books. They do read quite easily. And if you read each one as an individual piece, and then you start to see, oh, this has this focus, then this has this focus, then this has this focus. And yes, there is a narrative arc that travels across them so that they will tell a story. Each volume does have a slightly different focus, and that can help you with reading it. Either for the first time or a second time. Probably helps you to know that reading it for the first time, but you do notice it reading it for the second time. It's not just an overwhelming thing. Also, I found I tried very hard not to use the notes in the back. I just wanted to read it straight. The first time I read it, part of what made it incoherent for me, even more incoherent, was going backwards and forwards to the endnotes to try and make sense of things. And a lot of the things you don't actually need to understand. Like a lot of Toby's stuff, it's like, yeah, his audience, Walter, Dr. Slop, Yorick, they don't know the one end of a redoubt from a whatever. They don't care either. And so all you need to know is that this is his hobby horse. You don't actually need to know the ins and outs of this. So although an annotated version is good, and there are bits and pieces where knowing certain things helps, it's not essential. And I wouldn't, if I were to read it for the first time again, I would not be flipping backwards and forwards from the endnotes to the text quite so much, because unless I absolutely had to, because a lot of it is, you don't actually need that level of understanding, because there's a lot of nonsense in this, as deliberate nonsense, but the notes don't always clarify it. So yeah, that's Tristram Shandy. It is still probably one of my favourite novels. I certainly felt that I understood it a lot better reading it a second time. And I hope you enjoy reading it for either the first or the second, or maybe even the third time, and that you find something new in it every single time. It is dense enough a book that you can do that. So if you've read it, what do you think of it? If you haven't read it, go out there and try it, because it is worth it. Next week, Cesare will be bringing you the film of Tristram Shandy. So join us for that then. And until then, farewell. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.